Ta-Nehisi Coates is a best-selling author and recipient of the National Book Award. His collection of essays, We Were 8 Years in Power, An American Tragedy, is a fantastic, complex reflection on the Obama presidency with a callback to Reconstruction, which is where that quote comes from. And in Vanity Fair this week, he looks ahead to the next black president, which wrestles with the Harris campaign and what might come next. And he joins me now. It's great to have you back. First, I just want to get your feeling on, I feel so complex and almost a little overwhelmed going back into Obama world and Obama as the president, because it feels like it was beamed from another dimension. Everything seems so far away right now. And I'm just curious how what comes up for you as you watch this play out, as we prepare to have this big sort of reemergence of the Obamas as public figures, this presidential center?
God, I really didn't want to say this. What comes up is the conversation I had with him when I was working on the piece that's in that book called My President Was Black, and he said Trump couldn't win. And I think what I am always reminded of is he had qualities that made him the first black president. I don't know that somebody who thought that Trump could win,
right,
who thought that actually, these things, about the country weren't actually dead, that they were alive. I don't know if that would have been the first black president. But I also think that there was a very, very tragic inability to see certain aspects of this country that are very clearly still with us.
One of the things that you wrestle with in My President Was Black, that essay that's in there, that then now carries through to the essay that you have in Vanity Fair, is a kind of the complexity and inherent tension of a black man or woman coming through this country's history and coming from the long tradition of persecution and oppression that has meant, and the liberation movements that have brought us to this point, being essentially the commander of the American empire, the person that orders the drones and orders the army and orders the bombs and acts in a way across the world in ways that are oddly reminiscent in some ways of domestic oppression. And you think that's basically unresolved, but has to be forthrightly addressed, I think, is what I get from your latest essay. How do you think about what has to happen in this next presidential campaign with respect to how America acts in the world?
Chris, I thank you for asking me a question, because the fact of the matter was, when I was finishing up the last essay in that book, I had no real understanding. Obviously, I understood the vocabulary, of empire, and the vocabulary of saying America's an empire, but I had no real, and I hadn't seen it. I hadn't traveled much out of the country. And so what I have now is, a basic understanding. I mean, a stat that I think about all the time, it's in this book, How to Hide an Empire, is that the United States of America has 800 overseas bases on foreign land, and all the countries in the world together have like 30. Like the next closest is Russia with like 7. You know what I mean? And the fact of the matter is, and I go through the history of this in the piece, is everybody knows what happened with the indigenous Americans of this country, but what is less known is that we spent the 20th century and most of the Cold War undermining democracies, overthrowing governments, plotting against people, and a disproportionate amount of that violence, although not exclusively, was done in the Arab and Muslim world. And so when we have a conversation about Gaza, I think one of the things that we do not understand, or when we have a conversation about Iran, one of the things we do not understand is that these people remember things that we have had the imperial privilege of forgetting. Mm-hmm. And that includes white and black, by the way. We are Americans, and, no matter what oppression we've suffered here, we don't get an exemption from that.
I was thinking about, the essay talks a lot about the Harris campaign, and particularly how the Harris campaign was attempting to navigate the issue of Gaza, the severe and acute sense of desperate moral outrage that so many people in the Democratic coalition felt about what they were seeing being done to Gaza in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attacks in Israel. And kind of tried to just not do it at all. And then I was comparing that to Barack Obama's victory in 2008, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think Barack Obama being against the Iraq war was the reason he won that primary, which is to say,
Totally.
You couldn't avoid it. You couldn't run the primary in 2008 successfully in the Democratic coalition and not have the right view on that conflict. And it seems to me you're saying there's some similar reckoning coming in this primary process as we head towards 2028.
Yeah, and it's here. And look, I want to be fair here. You know, you get X number of days, a brief campaign. You are a black woman, and I am not blind to the sheer amount of weight, you know, that was being put on Kamala Harris's shoulders. And you know, look, I had my moments where I felt like, man, you dump all of this in her lap. Like now where it felt unfair. But then you go to the convention and you see that the patron saint is Fannie Lou Hamer. And Fannie Lou Hamer is obviously famous for, you know, attempting to integrate the Mississippi delegation, but she's less famous for the fact that as early as 1965, she was speaking out against the Vietnam War, and people were not happy about that. That Coretta Scott King, who, you know, is a hero to so many Democrats, was speaking out before her husband and had the foresight to understand and to ask of Lyndon Johnson, I do not understand how you can be so sympathetic to young black kids in Alabama and drop bombs on kids in Vietnam. And I think we kind of forgot that, to say nothing of 2008. I think to some extent, some of us who are in the political world have forgotten the very real history of the heroes that we claim.
Do you think there's a space for sort of reimagining what this all looks like after Trump? I mean, even after this sort of debacle of this war, and it's now maybe cessation or not, that like it does maybe create some intellectual, political, rhetorical space for something new, for just a new way of talking about the U.S. and the world?
Look, I mean, I think there's a moral imperative, too. I don't know how you remain consistent by claiming an anti-apartheid legacy here in the United States of America while enforcing it abroad. But I actually think practically you really, really have no choice.
Right.
Whatever, you know, we think about this, you know, in terms of pragmatics. Look, the party's moving somewhere else on this, you know. And I don't think, for instance, I don't think Zohran Mamdani would be mayor of New York City without the protests at Columbia. There is very real political energy, you know, around this that, as far as I'm concerned, has the right and correct moral view. So I think even from a practical perspective, there's no choice.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, the piece is called The Next Black President, Vanity Fair. I would advise you to check it out. It's really good. Great to see you, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you so much.